Hi, this is Mr. Kugler, and this is a reading from the book Chicken Soup for the Teenage Soul. We're going to start at page 6 in the section on relationships. Follow along as I read the passage if you so desire, and you can fill out the form after we're done reading, okay? First one is a little cartoon. It says, "This is the 90s. You can't just dump your boyfriend anymore. You have to recycle him." Passage called After a While. After a while, you learn the subtle difference between holding a hand and chaining a soul. And you learn that love doesn't mean leaning and company doesn't mean security. And you begin to learn that kisses aren't contracts and presents aren't promises. And you begin to accept your defeats with your head up and your eyes open, with the grace of an adult, not the grief of a child. And you learn to build all your roads on today, because tomorrow's ground is too uncertain for plans. After a while, you learn that even sunshine burns if you get too much. So plant your own garden and decorate your own soul, instead of waiting for someone to bring you flowers. And you learn that you really can endure, that you really are strong, and you really do have worth. And you learn, and you learn. With every goodbye, you learn. Written by Veronica A. Schaafstal. Written at age 19. Hi, next page. Soulmates. I have often told my daughter Lauren the story of how her father and I met and of our courtship. Now that she is 16 years old, she is concerned because she realizes that her soulmate might be sitting next to her in a class or might even ask her for a date, and she is not quite ready to make the same commitment her parents made years ago. I met Mike on October 9th, 1964. Our shy eyes met from across the patio at our friend Andrea's party. We smiled and eventually found ourselves in a conversation that lasted the entire evening, to the exclusion of everyone else. I was 11, and he was 12. We went steady 3 days later, which ended after a somewhat tumultuous month. Months later, Mike still invited me to his lavish bar mitzvah and even asked me to dance. Years later, he told me that despite my braces, my skinny legs, and my flipped hair, he thought I was beautiful. Mike and I had many mutual friends and were in the same social group at school, so our paths constantly crossed throughout the next few years. Every time I broke up with a boyfriend or had my heart broken by another, my mother would say, "Don't worry, you're going to end up with Mike Leb." I would shriek, "Never! Why would you think such a thing?" She would remind me how his name often came up in my conversations and what a nice guy he was. Finally, I was in high school, and it was packed with new, cute guys. I was ready. What did I care if Mike started dating my best friend? Why, I wondered, was this slowly driving me crazy? Why did we find ourselves talking while waiting for our buses? I will never forget the navy blue penny loafers he wore. Nobody else I knew had such great shoes. My mother's words often came to my mind, but I still wanted to erase them. By the summer after 10th grade, Mike and I had spent more time together, in the company of his girlfriend, also known as my best friend, and others. That summer, Mike left for a Spanish program in Mexico. I found I really missed seeing him. When he returned in August, he called and came by my home. He was so adorable with his tan skin and worldly demeanor. He still couldn't speak a word of Spanish, but he looked so good. It was August 19th, 1968, when we looked at each other outside my home and realized we had to be together. Of course, we had to wait until after the date I had that night with another guy. I told my date that I was going to start dating Mike, so I had to be home early. Mike then told his on-again, off-again girlfriend it was off again for good. We kept our relationship our little secret until we could proudly announce it at the next party. We walked in late and boldly told all of our friends that we were officially a couple. Not a soul seemed surprised as they uttered, "Finally." After graduation from high school, I went away to college. I lasted 10 weeks before I transferred to a closer college to be near Mike. On June 18th, 1972, we were wed. I was 19 and Mike was 20. We set up our love nest in married housing while we both finished our college degrees. I became a special education teacher while Mike went on to medical school. Now, 25 years later, I smile at our beautiful daughter, Lauren, and our handsome son, Alex. Although their parents' legacy causes them to look at high school relationships a bit differently, they will never have to worry about their parents saying, "Don't take it so seriously. It's only puppy love." Written by Fran Leb. The miss of a great miss. You never lose by loving. You always lose by holding back. Barbara DeAngelis. I'll never forget the day I first saw a dream walking. Her name was Susie Summers, name changed to protect the fantastic. Her smile, which sparkled beneath two twinkling eyes, was electric and made people who received it, especially guy people, feel very special. While her physical beauty was astounding, it was her invisible beauty I shall always remember. She really cared about other people and was an extremely talented listener. Her sense of humor could brighten your entire day, and her wise words were always exactly what you needed to hear. She was not only admired, but also genuinely respected by members of both sexes. With everything in the world to be conceited about, she was extremely humble. Needless to say, she was every guy's dream, especially mine. I got to walk her to class once a day, and once I even got to eat lunch with her all by myself. I felt on top of the world. I would think if only I could have a girlfriend like Susie Summers, I'd never even look at another female. But I figured that someone this outstanding was probably dating someone far better than myself. Even though I was president of the student body, I just knew I didn't stand a ghost of a chance. So at graduation, I said farewell to my first big crush. A year later, I met her best friend in a shopping center, and we had lunch together. With a lump in my throat, I asked how Susie was. "Well, she got over you," was the reply. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "You were really cruel to her the way you led her on, always walking her to class and making her think you were interested. Do you remember the time you had lunch with her? Well, she stayed by the phone the entire weekend. She was sure you were going to call and ask her out. I was so afraid of rejection, I never risked letting her know how I felt. Suppose I had asked her out and she'd said no. What's the worst thing that could have happened? I wouldn't have had a date with her. Well, guess what? I didn't have a date with her anyhow. What makes it worse is that I probably could have." Jack Schlatter. There's a picture. It says dating, and he's putting his arm around the girl and touching the dad on the other side. Next page, we're up to page 14. My first kiss, and then some. I was a very shy teenager, and so was my first boyfriend. We were high school sophomores in a small town. We had been dating for about 6 months. A lot of sweaty hand-holding, actually watching movies, and talking about nothing in particular. We often came close to kissing. We both knew that we wanted to be kissed, but neither of us had the courage to make the first move. Finally, while sitting on my living room couch, he decided to go for it. We talked about the weather, really. Then he leaned forward. I put a pillow up to my face to block him. He kissed the pillow. I wanted to be kissed so badly, but I was too nervous to let him get close. So I moved away down the couch. He moved closer. We talked about the movie. Who cared? He leaned forward again. I blocked him again. I moved to the end of the couch. He followed. We talked. He leaned. I stood up. I must have had a spasm in my legs. I walked over near the front door and stood there, leaning against the wall with my arms crossed, and said impatiently, "Well, are you going to kiss me or not?" "Yes," he said. So I stood tall, closed my eyes tight, puckered my lips, and faced upwards. I waited and waited. Why wasn't he kissing me? I opened my eyes. He was coming right at me. I smiled. He kissed my teeth. I could have died. He left. I wondered if he had told anyone about my clumsy behavior. Since I was so extremely and painfully shy, I practically hid for the next 2 years, causing me to never have another date all through high school. As a matter of fact, when I walked down the hallway at school, if I saw him or any other great guy walking toward me, I quickly stepped into the nearest room until he passed. And these were boys I had known since kindergarten. The first year at college, I was determined not to be shy any longer. I wanted to learn how to kiss with confidence and grace. I did. In the spring, I went home. I walked into the latest hangout, and who do you suppose I see sitting at the bar but my old kissing partner? I walked over to his bar stool, tapped him on the shoulder. Without hesitation, I took him in my arms, dipped him back over his stool, and kissed him with my most assertive kiss. I sat him up, looked at him victoriously, and said, "So there." He pointed to the lady next to him and said to me, "Mary Jane, I'd like you to meet my wife." Mary Jane West Delgado. Next page. Page 16. A comic Luann by Greg Evans. When a boy kisses you, where do you put your nose? How do you breathe? Do you keep your eyes open? What do you do with your hands? What do you say thank you afterwards? This is the useful stuff they should teach us in school. First kiss, first lesson. It's all right letting yourself go, as long as you can get yourself back. Mick Jagger. The night of my first real kiss was also the night of the worst fight I ever had with my mother. I'd had my eye on John Glass forever, and suddenly, out of nowhere, I spied him at the party that my best friend Laura and I had finally gathered the courage to stop by. The guy throwing the party lived in a skinny brick house on a crazy steep hill in San Francisco. Light from the kitchen and a street light down the block spilled into the little backyard garden, not quite reaching the corner where John was standing in a cluster of people. I was wearing my favorite pink shirt and Levi's with patches I'd sewn onto the knees. Laura smoothed my hair and told me to smile and pushed me out the door of the kitchen and into the garden. The next thing I knew, John and I were talking, and then we were the only people still in the garden. And then we were leaving the party together and walking hand in hand up and up the steep street. And then we kissed, and I felt like I was living someone else's life. I was so happy. The party was only a couple of blocks from my school, so I knew the streets we walked along as well as I knew the ones in my own neighborhood. But as I held John's hand and we walked and stopped and kissed, I felt like I was seeing the houses and the trees and the world for the first time. In a way, I felt as if I were seeing John for the first time. Like before, he was just this guy. Okay, a very nice guy with amazing pale blue eyes, who helped me with my calculus homework and played soccer as if he were born with cleats on his feet. But now here he was picking me a flower off a tree in someone's front yard. We meandered to a nearby park and sat on the swings and looked at the stars. Of course, I lost track of time as we roamed around, and when John finally dropped me off at my house, the sky was starting to turn light blue and pink with the dawn. My key had barely hit the lock on the front door when my mother pulled it open and said in her most dangerous and quiet voice, "Where is he?" Just like that, deadpan, each word equally weighted, equally heavy. Where is he? I stood on the stoop in the early morning, spring cold, yearning to bolt the 10 feet, so close, so far, between me and the safety of my room. I tried to play dumb. "Who are you talking about, Mom?" But she just stood there blocking the doorways, hands on hips, face contorted with anger, and said, "You're untrustworthy, you're irresponsible, and you're a disappointment." Later that day, Laura told me my mom had freaked out and called her at home in the middle of the night. Laura didn't have any idea where I'd gone after I left the party.